at noon at Batstow, and that open house will give the public an opportunity to learn about the visiting vehicle use map and the process that we used. Keeping in mind this is proposed, and so the open house will be an opportunity for the public to learn and provide comment. And we also have an online option that is available. So all those web resources will be made available at noon. So we will get started now with Commissioner Latourette. He'll make a brief introduction and an overview of the importance of this effort, and then we'll segue into John, who will give us a little bit more detail about the. Can I remind you to please mute yourselves, please. We will get started now, and the Assistant Commissioner will pick up after the Commissioner's opening remarks, and he'll discuss some more finer details about the mapping system that we used, the online or the visiting vehicle user survey that we did, which helped informed the development of this proposed map. So, Commissioner, thank you.
Well, thank you, Larry, for pulling this together. And I have to thank our guests here for their interest in the protection of public safety as well as our environment, which are really the two driving points of our endeavor here. And then, as you'll see from Assistant Commissioner Cecil's presentation in a few moments, I have to give a big hand to John for those who haven't met John before. He's the Assistant Commissioner for State Parks, Forests, and Historic Sites. He and his team of experts in state parks, as well as experts throughout the department, have done a gargantuan amount of work to analyze the natural features, our historic resources, and so many other important elements of the on-the-ground experience at Wharton, as well as the user experience at Wharton to develop this really important step. For those who don't or may not know, our team at DEP under John's leadership, are always so hard at work to maintain the natural treasure that is Wharton, ensuring that it's accessible for visitors to enjoy today, and really importantly, to preserve it for future generations that'll follow. Right? It's an enormous 150,000 acres, the largest of our 52 state parks and forests, and it rests atop one of our state's most important drinking water aquifers. And it's full of diverse habitats, protected natural resources, and plentiful opportunities for recreation. Right? I think that every New Jersey resident and visitor should experience the beauty and fun of Wharton. And we want to help make those visits as safe as they are exciting. And so to do that, the DEP has developed a new visiting vehicle use map. And that the goal here is to clearly outline safe, legal routes through the state forest where visitors may drive vehicles that are street legal, registered, and insured. The visiting vehicle use map, it's based on data from an extensive public engagement process, because over the last year, more than 1,600 people, as John will share with you in more detail, submitted surveys. They shared areas of interest and potential vehicle routes that were important to them. And as those potential routes were considered, our experts here at the DEP, they also evaluated data on the presence of historic resources, our endangered and non-game species and their respective habitats. They examined rare plant and ecological communities, our waterways, and importantly, the protected wetlands that are so critical to maintaining water quality within this aquifer, of course, but statewide. And this vehicle, the visiting vehicle use map, it's intended to help visitors traverse what is a truly vast state forest, to enable our state parks administration and our state parks police to better enforce rules against illegal off-road vehicles and keeping our visitors safe and ensuring the protection of our natural resources in the process. right? And so what we're going to share with you today is a presentation on how we went about this important work, including our user groups and members of the public and the conservationist community, how we brought that all together, how we analyzed it. And we're going to make that draft map available throughout the open house that'll be held throughout the day. There'll be online components, and it's a place where the website that'll be shared when we launch at noon, it'll be a place where we can also find that data on the natural and historic resources that have informed what has been a very deliberate, very important decision-making process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Commissioner Cecil, and I hope you appreciate the deep amount of the extensive amount of work that went into bringing us to this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I have a handful of slides to walk through, and then we could take some questions, I suppose. I'll defer to my communications colleagues to coordinate that. But just to kick this off and to walk you through some refresher probably for you all familiar with this issue. We are having I'm coming to you today from the heart of the Pinelands here at our Batstow Visitor Center in Wharton State Forest. We are having an open house for the public from noon to 7 p.m. We will also be releasing all of this information online at noon today, with the goal of collecting feedback and commentary from the public, whether they come out and make those comments in person, write them on a note card, drop them in a box, or submit that online. Obviously, the topic is Wharton State Forest, our largest state forest. Over 124,000 acres, as the commissioner indicated, really more than 800,000 annual visitors, probably 900,000, close to 1 million. So these numbers are a little dated. 2 historic villages, 9 campgrounds, 1 swimming area, and just an incredible diversity of natural, historical, cultural resources within this property. So a little bit of a reflection. Some of you may recall in the 2015, 2017 era, there was an effort underway to create a map, and that was put on hold. And so we've picked that process back up, I think, with the commissioner meeting with some of you in 2021 and committing to renewing our endeavor to get a vehicle use map back on the table in front of the public to clarify, for the purposes of safety and resource protection, where it is appropriate to drive a vehicle within Wharton State Forest. So we started that process in earnest on September 27th of 2022 with a kickoff meeting with the public, where we introduced this concept again to them and really invited them to participate in a survey to give us information about how they recreate in the forest, where they like to go, how they get there. And that survey was multifaceted. There were multiple choice questions, write your comments in opportunity, and then an opportunity to mark up a map and tell us through, putting points or drawing circles on a map where places of importance are to the visitor, or even to upload data that maybe someone's collected while hiking or hunting or whatever it is that they're choosing to recreate in the forest. So we went away. That was left open from September through November, mid-November. So we try to give folks plenty of time to provide input. And then we went away for a bit of period of time and analyzed those results. We brought them back to the public in February, a little over a year ago, February of 2023. Probably important to mention that we did introduce the concept of a permit to coincide with the visiting vehicle use map that was suggested at that September 2022 meeting, and suggested again in February. That February meeting, we did take public comment for 2 hours, and the predominance of that public comment was regarding the permit and the implications that might bring were we to institute it. So at this point in time, we're just tabling the permit discussion. We're just very focused on bringing the vehicle use map forward and finalizing that, and then we'll decide what additional measures are needed once we get that in place. So for the last almost year, we've been analyzing data from the public feedback and data that we have on hand regarding natural, cultural, historic resources to create the materials and produce what we are ultimately proposing as the visiting vehicle use map, again, which we're sharing with you all and the public today. So just a little deeper dive on some of the background details of how we got here. This infographic encapsulates a bit of the survey results that we collected. 1,610 surveys submitted, as you see in the center. Top left, 1,508 written responses. So those written responses take quite a bit of time to analyze, go through, compile, and summarize. As I mentioned, the concept of a permit was firmly on the table at that point in time, and we heard lots of commentary against a permit. Certainly folks expressed the desire to keep access as is, but recognized, I would suggest, as revealed through these data, that more enforcement is needed and certainly some access should be restricted. So I think there's a general acknowledgement that there are some concerns regarding public safety and resource protection revealed through the survey results. Probably a little bit hard to see. We've got a larger image, a couple slides forward. That top right map shows those hot spots, the darkest brown, where the folks indicated they liked to visit. Their preferred driving routes were in those areas, and we brought that together using GIS data analysis from the results that we collected. We did ask the public if they thought we should develop plans for responsible and sustainable access, and 65% of those respondents indicated yes. And we also asked if the Park Service rules, what we have in code, are easy to read and understand regarding motor vehicle rules and regulations, and 74% of the public indicated it was. So we felt like we've been in a good place in terms of the realities that we're seeing. We have rules and regulations. They're interpretable, understandable from the public perspective. We have a responsibility to put guidelines out there and plans and really manage the resource and ensure public safety. So a little bit of background on those survey respondents from really all over New Jersey and even across the country, but I would say the predominance were in those zip codes overlapping and immediately adjacent or within proximity to Wharton State Forest. So hearing a lot from those that are closest to the state forest, which is just kind of intuitive and makes sense. Again, a little closer look at the areas that the public expressed were of interest to drive, enjoyable areas to drive, preferred routes. Some of that is expected. Penn Swamp Road, Quaker Bridge Road, Batstow River Road. We know those are popular routes to drive, from Adsine to Batstow or vice versa. So somewhat expected results here, but great to get the feedback and drill a little closer into what the public is appreciating. We also asked for areas of concern and places that we need to look more closely, whether that's areas of concern from a natural resource standpoint or just the road conditions and facilities. So we do have some hot spots there. And I think it gives us some good information, adds to the information we already have regarding places we need to put some focus and attention to improve road conditions and increase protections for the resources within the forest. Drilling a little deeper into those written responses, 1,508 written responses, we heard loud and clear the desire for more enforcement. Of course, we can't get to enforcement without clear rules, guidelines, and ultimately a map that shows where folks can go. How do you get into the forest? Where should I go when I get there? We heard also the need to maintain the roads, to protect sensitive areas, better signage, so kind of a cluster of feedback there from my perspective. And then it kind of peters off a little bit in terms of map of roads, increased volunteer opportunities, and in-person communication with park staff. But other suggestions, barriers, reporting options, certainly some folks calling for off-road vehicle areas and trails which are not permitted within the state park and forest system, and some of the resource or some of the recreation opportunities like horseback riding trails and so forth. So a variety of information, but I still would say a pretty strong call for enforcement and some clear guidance for the public. We have been working with the Attorney General's office, and several years ago now, they did increase fines for illegal off-road vehicles and the associated damages. Over the last year, there has been closer coordination with respect to the Attorney General's office and law enforcement agencies to be clear about the enforcement penalties and approaches to enforcement. And we're looking forward to continuing those conversations with the Attorney General's office to address the enforcement side of this equation. So this will be tough to see in detail, but you'll get access to all this information following our discussion here today. This is a series of 9 maps and posters that will be presented to the public. As the commissioner referenced, they step through a progression of data analysis looking at wetlands, ecological communities, rare plants and animals, the overlap of all of that information and routes on the ground and suggested to be on the ground within Wharton State Forest, a consideration of that public feedback that we captured through the survey, and then an analysis of how all that comes together in terms of what are actually routes that we believe are drivable, passable, manageable, maintainable, and routes that just either don't exist or have such an overlap with resource concerns or public safety concerns that we don't believe that they should be open for vehicle use. And then the final map with just the proposed routes on it. I should say that a significant baseline of data for us is a series of U.S. Geological Survey topographic quadrangle maps, which the Pinelands Commission adopted in 2017. That is the first map in the top left. We looked very closely at that because it was what the Pinelands Commission adopted in the absence of the department at that time confirming a vehicle use map. That map suggests 510 miles of routes on the ground that possibly you could drive a vehicle on. We looked very closely at it and determined 120 miles of those routes on the USGS map were not routes at all. They were old boundary lines, trails that had grown over, maybe fire lines that had grown up. So we removed those 120 suggested miles of routes, which brought us down to 390 miles of routes. We then looked more closely, considering all of the resource data, and added 10 miles of routes, which brought the total consideration up to 400 miles of routes. And then through the analysis of the natural, historical, cultural resources, we removed 200 miles of routes, considering concerns that we have for public safety and conflicts with the resources on the ground. So ultimately, our proposed route map includes 200 miles of routes for vehicle use and driving. This gives you just a snapshot glimpse of what that looks like in terms of the comparison. So the yellow routes here are those that we are proposing for vehicle use. You'll see in the kind of lower left corner, one of those yellow routes with the dotted black line through it. That is an addition to the map that we're just bringing forward and saying we're going to add what is ultimately 10 miles of new routes through the state forest. And then the brown and red and green, those are areas of overlap with a resource concern. And those are routes that we are suggesting to remove from public use. Some of those aren't used currently. Some of those folks probably try to use. Some of those may be reasonably well used, but at certain times of year, like now, when we have a lot of water on the ground, they're just impassable. And so ultimately, our map looks a little bit cleaner than that. This is just a snapshot view of what the proposed route map looks like when you drill into it. Stepping back, this is it's kind of hard for me to understand how you all see this because your screen sizes may vary, but this is the overview map that compares all of the routes. The yellow routes are what we're proposing, and then all of the different colors are what we're proposing to remove. About 200 on either side, 200 miles of proposed routes for driving, 200 miles that we're suggesting we aren't routes on the ground, not passable, shouldn't be driven on, and will be subjected to a variety of measures. Some need signage, some need barriers, some may not need anything because there's just trees there and you can't possibly drive it. And then our final slide here, in essence, is the proposed route map. We've analyzed this. 98% of the 124,000 acres that you see represented here, not including any outlying parcels that would add acreage to Wharton State Forest, but 98% of this property, as you're seeing it reflected on the map, are those routes. 98% are less than 1 mile. 98% of the acreage is less than 1 mile from any paved or sand route. So, point being that by and large, you can park your vehicle and walk to a mile of anywhere within Wharton from the routes we are proposing. I'll recognize up front that I know that will likely raise concerns for some of the users of the state forest, particularly those that might like to hunt or fish off a beaten path. may require a longer walk than what they were previously forcing their Jeep or buggy or whatnot into. But again, I'll just stress that importance of us adopting a map for public safety, for prioritizing route maintenance, for clarifying for the public where they can go and where they can get to, and certainly importantly for the protection of the natural, historic, and cultural resources. So with that, I'll stop, and I guess I'll flip it back to you, Larry.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was really very good. Appreciate that. We'll move into the question and answer section now. I just remind you to please leave yourselves on mute, and you may raise your hand, and I'll recognize you, and then we should have ample time for you to get all your questions answered this morning. Any questions? John?
Yeah, Larry, can you hear? Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
John,
hi,
go ahead.
morning. So, yeah, thanks. So,
Hey, John, we have a bad
so,
connection here. John?
So, you mentioned there's been you're proposing a. Can you hear me? No, I guess not.
You were really breaking up there. Do you want to try the chat?
Can you hear me now?
It's a little bit better, but you might want to try the chat.
All right. Okay. You go ahead with somebody else, and I'll.
Hurdle, why don't you turn off your video to save some bandwidth and try your question again?
All right. Okay, I just turned off my camera. Can you hear me any better now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's try this again. So really my question is, what is the net effect on off-road vehicle access to in Wharton Forest? I mean, is this, you mentioned, John Cecil, that you're proposing 200 miles of routes in which vehicles would be accessible to vehicles, and the removal of another 200 miles. So does that mean that there's a 50% reduction in the amount of in the number of route miles that are typically accessed by off-road vehicles?
I don't think that's the way to think about it, John. And I can explain that. I can give you my perspective on that, and then Mr. Cecil can, by all means, correct me and also provide further information. So the idea that somehow by identifying appropriate legal routes that there is necessarily a restriction of other routes is fundamentally incorrect, because places where folks may believe that they are now restricted, they never should have been to begin with. And that's really important, right? Many areas that folks may frequent because perhaps they provide an interesting terrain challenge for one off-road vehicle or another. Many of those routes are included here. Those that are a point of natural resource, those that are a point of the presence of a protected natural resource should never have been carved. Any of those pathways should never have been carved to begin with. And so it's not that there are existing legal routes that are being foreclosed, but rather that routes that have been created by virtue of unauthorized use are being pointed out as a appropriate point of enforcement because folks should not have been there to begin with. Whether that means you're endangering a rare plant species by destroying a wetland, or endangering your own safety by getting stuck in that wetland yourself. And so it would by and large be inappropriate to suggest that there is a restriction being placed on what was once legally allowable, but is now not legally allowable. It is an emphasis upon what was never legally allowable or safe to begin with. John, Cecil, by all means, feel free to correct or expound upon that.
Well, I think you said it well. I think it's really important to bear in mind that this suggestion that we're moving 200 miles of routes that were drivable is not the correct way to consider that. There were 510 miles of routes on a U.S. Geological Survey map that were never verified, and we worked through a process to try to verify which were drivable. Then we looked at a consideration of how those natural resources overlap, and the wetland presence within Wharton State Forest is significant, right? We've got a very shallow aquifer. It intersects with the above ground, right? The aquifer comes right up to the surface. So there are places that are just so wet, they're appropriate for a canoe, not appropriate for anything that's four-wheeled and mechanized. So just so much of this is not a place that you would want to or should drive a vehicle. And in many instances, you just can't because there are trees in the way. So it's really from a point of, there was a bunch of stuff on a map. It hadn't been verified. We've gone through a process of verifying it, and we've looked very closely at the resources on the ground. And that gets us to a place where we have 200 miles of routes that we think are drivable, that we ultimately can maintain, and that's what we're proposing for public use.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Bill?
Hi, it's Bill Barlow from the Press of Atlantic City. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask a little bit more about enforcement. There was a mention of increased fines, and it seemed like that related to off-road vehicles in particular. I wanted to see if for on-road vehicles that are using some of the routes that are now, I mean, not, however passable they are or aren't, will there be a legal consequences for somebody using some of these 200 miles that are being taken out of the routes?
I think there's a point of clarification, Bill, in the question itself, because I think that you're making a distinction there between on-road and off-road vehicles, and we should be very clear that the only vehicles that are allowed to be in a public land, right, whether that is a state park or forest or wildlife management area, the only vehicles that are allowed are registered, insured, street legal vehicles, right? And so that's a very fundamental point that is important for us all to understand. And what does that mean? That means if you are operating a motorized vehicle that is not insured, that is not registered, that is not street legal, it should not be in the state park or forest at all.
So I understand the distinction, but there was a mention of legal consequences for using 4x4s for dirt bikes. What I was asking is specifically for legal vehicles. They're insured, they're registered, they're everything they're supposed to be street legal, that are, if they're taken off of the maps that are ultimately approved, I realize that's still down the road, what will be the legal consequences for the driver in that case? you're using a road that's now no longer listed on the official state maps.
So that's a violation of the Parks Code and there's a fine.
Like, what's
And
the
Bill,
fine gonna be?
Bill, I'll point out that in the press release, it's mentioned the embargoed press release that I sent you, that the fines are mentioned in that press release.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I have another one, Larry, if I may. Is when this plan is finalized, will it be rolled out to other state forests and other pieces of public land where off-road vehicles are currently used?
Mr. Cecil, do you want to explain our approach?
So we've gone through a pretty intensive process here with Wharton. We have a set of next steps for Wharton State Forest, which is to move through a public comment period that will be available through March 9th of this year. We'll go away and analyze the results, determine if any additional changes are needed to the proposed map, and then finalize the map and bring it forward to the public. Then there's the act of implementing the map on the ground, undertaking the signage, the barriers, the education with the public, the enforcement. I think it is throughout that process a consideration of our other state parks and forests and the need for visiting vehicle use maps. Although I would say that for probably the vast majority, if not all, of the other state parks and forests, we have maps that detail roads on them currently. Wharton is unique because it's such a large state forest. There are a couple of kind of your major county roads, paved roads, detailed on the map that you get when you visit online or come into a park office, but it didn't detail all of those appropriate for use sand roads that go through the state forest. So your question is a good one. We'll have to take a good look in terms of what additional tweaks are needed, but I think the greatest need has been here within Wharton State Forest.
Okay, so just to be clear on that, are you saying that the use of the other state forests is currently clear, that Bass River State Forest, for example, is that are drivers clear on where they can and cannot legally drive in that and other tracts, other public tracts?
I certainly think it's clear. That's not to say that there aren't improvements that could be made, and I expect we'll have improvements to make with Wharton going forward. And then there is also the reality of, we know that there is an off-road vehicle ATV use problem in New Jersey, period, writ large. It occurs in an urban area, it occurs in rural areas, it occurs on public land and private land. So that is something that we're going to continue to need to work to address across all of those land types, land ownerships, with law enforcement, Attorney General's office, and the landowners.
Okay, any other questions, please? Frank? Frank, if you have a question, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted. Yeah, so according to the survey, people are asking for more enforcement. Is there a plan to do that? And at the same time, can you kind of say how many motor vehicles or drivers were fined last year?
We could follow up with the fine data. I don't have that in front of me at the moment. In terms of enforcement, it's an ongoing effort to address the enforcement. We've been recruiting and hiring for additional law enforcement officers. We've got a new class of law enforcement recruits in a couple of academies, police academies across the state right now, continuing to bolster those ranks as we move forward. And having this visiting vehicle use map in place ultimately by the end of this year will give us an incredible tool to educate the public on where they're supposed to be and where they're not supposed to be with a vehicle, and then work on the enforcement issues that go along with that. I say it that way because I do think it's important that we educate the public, right? It's not a matter of just running out and knock somebody over the head with a fine. It's, assuming that they're not there doing something totally malicious. If people are following their GPS units in places that it's telling them that they can go when they really shouldn't be there. So we've got to work with folks on the ground and the realities that everyone's experiencing to get the education in place and then move forward with the enforcement. That is also coupled with barriers and signage and to complement the map. So there's a number of instruments that we need to utilize here to get everybody in line.
Sure. And if I can, unless there's somebody else,
Yeah, Frank.
so about 200 people said they were against a permit system. So is there a permit system being proposed at this point?
Permit system is not being proposed at this point. It remains under our consideration, but it is not being proposed at this point.
And just one last question. So you're going from roughly 400 miles to 200 miles of drivable roads.
No, we're not.
Oh, okay.
That's not correct.
That's not correct.
That's not correct.
All right.
We are
Well,
identifying.
You're gonna end up with 200 miles of roads where people had been using, I'll just say 400 miles. I don't know what they had been using. So
yeah, I wouldn't make a representation about what folks have been using in a linear extent, because I don't think that that's well known to begin with. We know folks are in areas that they shouldn't be, either because it's dangerous for them or because it is destructive of a natural resource that is legally protected. So making the clear indication of where folks are permitted to be is a new endeavor, right? It's not as though there is an existing indication of where you are allowed to be. There is a presumption that folks are allowed to be wherever they want to be. Well, that's incorrect. But it is not as though there is a reduction in what was once legally available.
Yeah, I guess I misspoke there. So my ultimate point was, so you're funneling people, or people are going to be limited to 200 miles of roads. A lot of these roads are also used by pedestrians, I'm guessing, and others. Are they going to be clearly marked that somebody's walking along a road? They're going to know it's a vehicle road, or I guess how much signage would be there? And are there going to be signs at Wharton is a big place, so there's no single entry point for a lot of people. They just they follow a road and take it in. Will those roads kind of say this is a motor vehicle road, so people know what they're getting into?
John, do you want to speak to some of the signage endeavor that is attendant to this?
Well, certainly we will be working to put signs in place that clarify maximum speed and where access is permitted and where it isn't. I think what I hear in your question, Frank, is people riding a horse down a sand road and not being prepared for a vehicle then coming to pass them.
Right.
And there is some reality with that, right? Like, we don't want people to be surprised, but we also need to bear in mind that we have a 20-mile speed limit on these sand roads. So the expectation is that if you're driving in the state forest, you're not racing through there. It's not a motor speedway. It's not a highway. These are routes for scenic driving. I know folks use the forest to get from where they live on one side to work on the other. But again, they need to do that in a way that is respectful of the property that they're driving through and the people that are using it. So this is not, by and large, a major highway. We do have, Route 206 that goes through part of it. That's a different kind of conversation. But on the sand roads, I think there's some sensitivity that all of the users need to have, hikers, horseback riders, bicyclists, vehicle operators, for each other and the realities that come with that.
Good.
Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Yes, I have one more question, Larry, on
Sure.
Actually two more questions on the issue of enforcement. One is the higher fines that the AG's office introduced a while ago. Have they had an effect? Has there been any indication that they've been effective in reducing the abuses of the pinelands? And also, how many more park police are in the process of being hired?
John, I'll let you respond to that. And I have to hop, but I wanted to thank our friends in the press for joining us and the team here for their great work. A good day to all, and Mr. Cecil, you've got it. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
So John, to the point of your question in terms of the effectiveness of the fines to date.
Yeah.
When I step back and look at the impacts that we see from off-road vehicles across the state, in Wharton State Forest and other state forests, I would say we haven't fully realized the potential that those fines and damage assessments can offer to us. In Wharton, that's particularly challenged because we have a hard time of clarifying to date where people are and are not supposed to be. The potential exists out there for those fines to be quite effective in where we can apprehend, intercept, write a ticket summons for those folks that are undertaking inappropriate bad behavior. So there's work to be done there, and I think that's just something that's, to your point, worth acknowledging. The second part of your question, remind me again.
Well, how many police?
The number of police officers.
More police are being hired. Yeah.
We have 12 officers in the academy now, or they're kind of in various stages of in the midst of the academy, getting ready to go into the academy. And we did a significant recruitment going through the latter half of last year, and we're kind of starting that cycle again, eager to recruit probably another 12 cadets at least. So this is an ongoing thing, as we're seeing in lots of industries, kind of across the board. It's a very tight labor market. Hiring and retaining staff writ large is challenging, but we're super excited to have 12 new recruits in various stages of the police academy, and we are recruiting constantly for additional park police, and we'll be going through that diligently over the next 6 months for sure.
So roughly what percentage increase are you hoping to achieve when all of this is done in terms of the park numbers of park police?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a little reluctant to get too far down the details of park police staffing. The reality is we have 450,000 acres that we've got to manage. We have 17 million visitors, and it's a challenge in terms of covering all of that land and all of those people with law enforcement. So we deploy law enforcement very strategically based on events, visitor use. We undertake operations regarding off-road vehicles, ATVs. We exercise a lot of strategy in terms of the use of our park police resources, and I think I'd just prefer to leave it there, I guess.
Great.
Okay. Thank you,
John. Thank you so much for for all your good information this morning. We were recording this session, so anybody who needs a recording, we hope to have that available, hopefully within an hour to an hour and a half. And again,
Larry,
just remind,
if just one more thing before folks go, and I don't know if this applies to you all, to the news outlets that we have present. It has been mentioned to me that some of the news outlets are using images from 2015 when this was a very hot topic. And my ask to all of you is to use current images. We can assist with that if you need additional kind of new images to represent the issue here, but would appreciate if we could get current on some of the images that are being used. Again, I don't know if that's totally applicable to all of you that are here today, but to ensure it gets captured on the recording for others that may listen as well. Thank you.
Sure. And yeah, so if there are any of those logistical issues you need assistance with, such as photographs, or other resources, please feel free to reach out to me. But like I said, the video will be available. The resources, the map itself will all be online very shortly. So please take a look through those materials. I'm sure that you will find them very helpful, and wish everyone a great day and a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.